Hello, you, the one listening to this story. Where are you right now? In the heart of towering skyscrapers in New York? Along the charming, time-worn streets of Savannah? Or perhaps somewhere quiet, where the evening breeze still carries the scent of wildflowers? Wherever you are, take a few minutes to listen to a story that feels like something out of a movie, yet has touched millions of hearts around the world. Picture this: a lavish wedding bathed in candlelight, with the soft melody of a piano floating through the air. The groom, a poised, elegant millionaire. The bride, a woman so stunning she could have stepped out of a magazine cover. But then, at the most sacred moment, an 8-year-old girl speaks up. "Daddy, don't marry her. She's not who you think she is." What do you think happens next? If you were in that moment, would you trust the child or the heart that's already fallen in love? Have you ever doubted someone everyone else admired? But deep down, something just didn't feel right. And if that instinct came from a child, would you have the courage to stop and listen? The story you're about to hear is a symphony of tension and revelation, where the truth is veiled beneath a white wedding dress, where love is manipulated by a merciless plan, but also where the tiny heart of a little girl becomes the guiding light that leads the truth out of darkness. Are you ready? Don't forget to drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from, because maybe, just maybe, your city has witnessed stories no one dared to tell. Now, step into a journey of courage, trust, and the quiet miracles that only appear when a small heart refuses to stay silent. No one could have imagined that an 8-year-old girl, dressed in a faded daisy print cotton dress, would be the one to stop a $1 million wedding and uncover a secret that could very well kill her own father. But in Charleston, where old buildings still whisper tales of the past and the wind drifting in from the Ashley River carries the echoes of things left unsaid, miracles often hide in the most unexpected places. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of the Carter estate, casting golden ribbons across the polished wooden floor. Every floating speck of dust looked like a tiny soul telling a story. And the great room was so still, you could almost hear time slipping by on the face of the antique clock mounted on the wall. Upstairs, in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, Ellie Carter sat quietly, her small hands arranging seashells she and her mother once gathered at Folly Beach. Each shell held a memory, a laugh, a trace of someone who now lived only in photographs. Her father used to call Ellie her mother's compass, because she always seemed to know which way was right, which path was true, and which direction the heart should return to. Grayson Carter, Ellie's father, had once been a man with a gaze that never lost its way, in business or in life. But ever since he lost his wife, he drifted like a ship without an anchor, silently navigating the vast ocean of success with no shore in sight. His world had since shrunk into blueprints of luxury estates, parties without genuine laughter, and cold evenings warmed only by expensive wine. Ellie was the last flicker of light he had left. But even that light sometimes wasn't enough to illuminate what was approaching. "Ellie, could you come downstairs for a moment?" Grayson's voice echoed from below. Not loud, not urgent, but there was something off in the rhythm of his words, as if his heart was beating to a different tune. Ellie placed her mother's favorite, a soft, pink shell, in its rightful spot on the wooden shelf, then rose gently to her feet. Her black ponytail swayed with each step, like strands of memory preparing to drift into an unnamed breeze. She found her father standing in the living room, near the portrait of her mother, Lila Carter, whose smile still glowed like morning light. He wore a white dress shirt and slacks, not the typical tailored business attire, but something that hinted at a new beginning. The smile he gave Ellie that day wasn't like the one she was used to. It was weightless, like a boat just untied from its dock, and just as fragile as the season's first wave. "There's something I want to tell you," he said, motioning for her to sit beside him on the deep blue velvet sofa, the one her mother used to love. Ellie sat down, her eyes quiet mirrors, reflecting everything without needing to say a word. "Do you remember Miss Miranda, the woman I've been inviting to dinner lately?" Grayson's voice was careful, each word placed like a foundational brick in a house he hoped would stand. Ellie nodded, but something in her chest began to shift, like wet sand pulled gently by an approaching tide. Ms. Miranda, or Miranda Vale, was the woman who always dressed flawlessly, always gave Ellie glossy wrapped presents, but never once asked what she actually liked. "I asked Miranda to marry me, and she said yes." The words fell like a chill autumn wind, slicing through Ellie's heart in an instant. "We're getting married at the end of next month. You'll be our little flower girl. Miranda's already designing the dress for you." Ellie said nothing. Something within her had cracked, not because she feared change or even the arrival of someone new, but because, deep down, something about Miranda had never felt safe, like a painting too perfect to be real, beautiful, but false. Ellie remembered her mother once saying, "A kind person never needs to prove they're kind. True gentleness has a tone your heart will always recognize." And Miranda had never had that tone. "Are you happy?" Grayson asked, his eyes full of hope, aching for her approval. Ellie smiled, just a tiny smile, delicate like a wildflower blooming at winter's edge, but her eyes betrayed a quiet worry. "If you're happy, then I want that too," she replied. Grayson wrapped his arms around his daughter, unaware that in her eyes, the compass he once trusted, something had begun to spin out of place. Outside, the Charleston rooftops were bathed in the amber hues of dusk. But within Ellie's heart, a longer night had just begun. Charleston woke to a quiet spring morning, the mist thin as a bridal veil drifting across the grounds of the Carter estate. Gentle sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a soft glow on the walls where faded photographs still hung. Portraits of a woman with kind eyes and a warm, radiant smile. In the small attic room at the end of the third-floor hallway, Ellie Carter sat motionless in front of the piano her mother used to play each evening. The keys lay silent, like hidden sorrows resting in the corners of her heart, and the thin layer of dust on the polished wood seemed like time itself. Untouched, waiting for someone brave enough to reach into memory. Today, her father, Grayson Carter, was away again. He was a man of high-stakes contracts, closed-door meetings, and the acclaimed head of the most prestigious architecture firm in the Southeast. But to Ellie, he had once been nothing more and nothing less than the man who told bedtime stories, who untangled her hair with ink-stained shirt cuffs. Everything had changed after her mother's death 2 years ago. It was as if the house itself had traded its sounds for whispers, and every door led to something no one was ready to face. That morning, something unusual happened. Ellie heard her father's footsteps on the stairs, quick, light, and oddly restless. She tilted her head, listening to the way a detective might follow a clue. "Ellie, can you come downstairs for a moment?" His voice called from the foyer. It didn't sound like his usual morning tone, not the steady rhythm of breakfast reminders or school day routines, but carried a note Ellie couldn't quite name. She stood, her fingers grazing the final piano key, a delicate farewell to melodies never played. Grayson Carter stood waiting at the base of the grand staircase, hands gently clasped, his suit simple but flawless, as always. But his eyes hesitated, lit with a strange flicker. "What is it, Daddy?" Ellie asked as she stepped down, each stare matching the pulse in her chest. Grayson reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "There's something important I need to tell you. About Miranda." Ellie blinked. The name wasn't unfamiliar, but it had never felt close. Miranda Vale, the woman who entered their lives like a misplaced note in an unfinished symphony. Ash blonde hair, perfectly done, a voice smooth as silk. But those blue eyes. Ellie always felt something was off, as if they were reflecting a world she was never meant to enter. "I proposed to Miranda, and she said yes," Grayson said, his smile widening like sunshine after a storm. "We're going to be a new family." In that moment, Ellie felt like she was standing between two thick walls, one made of memory, the other of reality, where her father's voice echoed, but her heart couldn't find its rhythm. She swallowed hard. "You really plan to marry her?" "Yes, just 3 months from now, and I think you'll grow to love her the way I've learned to love again," Grayson said, his eyes bright with the conviction of someone who believes he's making the most right decision in the world. But Ellie, only 8 years old, didn't need to understand every word adults said. She only needed one thing, the feeling of safety. And at that moment, it was quietly slipping away. She nodded gently. "I just wish Mom could see this too." Grayson fell silent, then pulled her into a hug. "So do I," he whispered. But in his arms, Ellie heard her own heart more clearly than anything else, a slow-burning warning, like wind whispering through a cracked window. Not because Miranda was beautiful or flawless, but because there was something about her that made Ellie's small heart ache. And that feeling, unnoticed by anyone else, would soon become the reason this little girl would be forced to become the sole protector of her own family. That afternoon, a gentle Charleston sea breeze drifted through the dining room window of the Carter home, carrying with it the salty tang of the ocean, mingled with the soft scent of blooming jasmine just outside the porch. The room, long subdued in silence for the past 2 years, now stirred with unfamiliar liveliness. Fresh flower arrangements, napkins folded into swan shapes, and scented candles lit earlier than usual. Ellie sat in her familiar oak chair, wearing a simple white dress with a round collar delicately stitched with pale pink thread, making her look like a small flower placed in a setting never meant for childhood. On the table sat a spread of Southern-style roasted chicken, golden buttered rolls, and chilled apple juice poured into crystal glasses, everything arranged perfectly, as though directed by a scene planner. Miranda Vale entered, tall, poised, her smile lit not from the heart, but as though switched on from someplace far away. "Ellie, darling," she said, taking the seat across from her. "Tonight, there are 3 of us, a new family." Grayson sat in the middle, his gaze constantly returning to Miranda with a trust he no longer tried to conceal. Ellie remained silent, fingers clutching the edge of her napkin, her smile strained, like a blossom forcing its way through frost. In a fleeting instant, Miranda's eyes flicked toward her, cold, quick, like a thin blade gliding across water. "Oh, I have a little gift for you," Miranda said, opening a velvet blue box and revealing a silver bracelet with a tiny laurel leaf charm, delicate and elegant. "It was a gift from my mother when I was 10. I think you'll take good care of it." Ellie took it, heart tangled in confusion. The bracelet was cool to the touch, the silver shimmering under the candlelight, but it sent a chill through her chest. "Thank you," she replied, her eyes fixed on Grayson, hoping for a signal, a flicker of anything in his gaze to say everything was okay. But no, he only smiled, happy, as though her sadness had long flown away like a forgotten bird. "Do you like it?" Grayson asked. Ellie nodded gently. "Yes, Daddy, it's beautiful." Inside her, each word was chosen like a careful step across a rickety bamboo bridge. One wrong move, and everything might fall apart. When dinner ended, Miranda leaned down and whispered into Ellie's ear, her perfume soft but sharp, cold as jasmine in the early mist. "I hope you know how to keep secrets. Your father doesn't need any more worry anymore, Ellie. Especially when happiness has only just begun." Her smile returned, perfectly polished. But for Ellie, from that very moment, the silver bracelet was no longer a gift. It became a mark, a silent reminder that she was now part of a game she hadn't chosen to play, but one she had no choice but to win. And that was when, unnoticed by anyone, a small light of vigilance ignited inside her, as fine as a spider's thread, but as enduring as the quiet roots of a 100-year-old oak. After that dinner, everything inside the house at 112 Magnolia Place seemed to shift, not with sound, but through the tiniest details. Details adults often overlooked, but for a child like Ellie, whose memory worked like a camera, nothing was too faint to be recorded. One morning, as she bent to tie her shoes for school, she heard Miranda speaking softly on the phone in the study. The door left slightly ajar, her voice light as mist but cold as ice. "Don't call at this hour again. He still trusts me completely. Just 3 more weeks." Ellie froze. Each word fell into her memory like pebbles dropped into a still pond, sending ripples she could no longer ignore. 3 weeks. Complete trust. Those weren't the words of someone in love, but someone playing a role. At school, Ms. Lila, Ellie's gentle and observant teacher, whom she secretly adored for her quiet kindness, had begun to notice the change. "She's like a piano that's fallen out of tune," she commented to the secretary during recess. But no one asked Ellie anything, and Ellie said nothing, because something in her instincts told her she had to watch longer, wait for the right moment. That evening, when Grayson casually asked Ellie how she felt about Miranda's suggestion to redesign her bedroom to make it more grown-up, Ellie simply smiled and nodded. Even though deep down, she felt the room, the one where she and her mother once arranged stuffed animals together, was about to become something cold and unfamiliar. On the 4th day after that first dinner, Ellie happened to see Miranda folding several picture frames and placing them into a box. They were photographs of her mother, Sophia, the woman with a smile as gentle as autumn and eyes that always held a quiet sorrow, light as mist. When Ellie stepped into the room, Miranda quickly closed the box and turned around with that familiar smile. "I'm just clearing space to redecorate," she said. "The house needs a breath of new life." A breath of new life. Ellie didn't know how much an 8-year-old needed to understand to recognize that this so-called new life was quietly wiping away every trace of a woman who had passed, as if the past were a stain to be scrubbed clean. And that night, for the first time, Ellie dreamt of her mother. In the dream, Sophia didn't speak. She stood by the window, hair loose, white dress swaying gently in the breeze, then tilted her head toward Ellie and softly shook it. Not a single word, but in her eyes, warmth, warning, and love. Ellie jolted awake in a cold sweat. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a faint glow on the silver bracelet around her wrist, the laurel leaf charm reflecting a dim flicker, like a promise she now wore. To protect her father, to honor her mother's memory, and not to let darkness take root in the home they once called safe. From that day on, Ellie began taking notes. A small notebook hidden inside an old music box held lines of pencil-written observations, each one careful and precise. Day 5. Miranda changed the safe's passcode. Day 6. Secret phone call in the garden. Day 7. Opened a black envelope labeled, "Received, travel confirmed." What is she planning? Beneath the last line, Ellie drew a key, not knowing what it would unlock, but believing that every secret had a lock, and the brave always found the way to turn it. When a child begins to quietly investigate the woman about to become her stepmother, not out of jealousy or rebellion, but because of a deep, instinctive unease. Grown-ups ought to pause and listen. But no one listened to Ellie then. No one saw her small, unwavering eyes, watching every gesture, every slip of the tongue Miranda made. And in that silence, a battle had begun. Not with weapons, but with memory, emotion, and a loyalty unshaken toward the father Ellie loved more than anything in the world. And from that quiet place, the truth would slowly begin to surface. On the second Sunday of May, Charleston rested beneath a soft sunlight and the gentle breeze drifting in from the Ashley River, carrying a faint scent of orange blossoms in the air. From the second-floor balcony, Ellie sat curled in the wooden chair where her mother once read books, her eyes scanning the front garden as though waiting for a sign from the universe. But instead of butterflies or songbirds, what she saw was Miranda, standing with a strange man at the far corner of the fence. They spoke in low voices, almost whispers, and in a fleeting moment, the man reached up and brushed Miranda's hair aside, a gesture that could not be mistaken. Ellie's heart pounded like a drum. She slipped out of her phone and captured the moment through the sunlit reflection on the window pane. Blurry, indistinct faces, but enough to remember. Moments later, like a shadow, Miranda returned to the house, a thick, cream-colored envelope in her hand. And when her eyes passed briefly across the living room where Ellie had just entered, they held none of their usual softness. "You should go to bed early. Good girls don't wander around at dusk," Miranda said, her voice soft as silk, but with a hidden blade in every word. Ellie said nothing. She walked straight up to her room, closed the door, and wrote one more line in her notebook. "Strange man." Touched her hair. Cream envelope. Note. Find a way to enhance the photo. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. The house felt bigger, colder, the shadows behind the curtains thicker than usual. She sat up, hugging the pillow her mother once embroidered, and thought of her father. Grayson Carter, a brilliant man in business, but awkward in life's smaller details. He could sign million-dollar contracts without flinching, but would forget his own birthday without someone to remind him. He loved his daughter. That much no one could deny. But ever since Miranda stepped into their lives, he had become preoccupied. Preoccupied with rebuilding a life. Preoccupied with the hope that someone might soothe his loneliness, so much so that he no longer noticed the quiet rearrangements slowly unfolding inside the house that had once belonged to him and to Ellie. The next morning, as Miranda drove Ellie to school, the rhythmic tap of high heels on the wooden floor of the car interior sounded like false notes in a melody. "Soon, we'll have a very special wedding. I hope you'll be the most beautiful little flower girl," Miranda said, her eyes fixed on the road, though the rear-view mirror betrayed a gaze locked on Ellie, like a test in progress. "Yes," Ellie replied softly, hoping the conversation would end there. But Miranda continued. "You know, sometimes adults do things that children don't fully understand. But if you stay quiet at the right moments, life becomes much easier." That sentence slid over Ellie like a blade skimming water, not painful yet, but it left a fracture, one her young memory and instinct would never forget. Something began to grow inside her. Not fear, but clarity. Clarity, as sure as the morning sun, that Miranda was hiding something. And if she did nothing, one day her father might wake up, too late to see the full picture. During recess that day, Ellie brought the blurry photo to Ms. Lila. She didn't say much, only that she needed it printed clearer for a school project. The teacher gave her a suspicious look, but asked no questions. 3 hours later, Ellie received the enhanced image. The man in the picture had a small tattoo on his left wrist, a symbol shaped like an hourglass. Miranda stood beside him, her eyes glancing at him not like a stranger's, but like someone who had never truly left. That evening, when Grayson returned home, Ellie tested the waters. "Daddy, do you know anyone named Tyler?" Grayson paused while loosening his tie. "Tyler, who, sweetheart?" "I'm not sure. I just heard someone mention that name." He frowned, then shook his head. "No one I know by that name." "Why?" Ellie pressed her lips together. "No reason. I was just curious." She knew she couldn't say more. Not yet. That night she hugged her pillow and whispered to herself, like a quiet ritual of courage, "I will protect Daddy. I won't let anyone hurt him, not even someone dressed like an angel." And in that silence, a plan began to take shape. Not the plan of a child, but of a heart that knew how to love, how to feel pain, and most of all, how to act when the time came. Beyond the bedroom door, behind the thick curtains, the soft Charleston breeze still whispered, as if promising Ellie, "The truth always finds the light, as long as you keep believing in it." By Friday afternoon, Charleston wore a coat of gray clouds, and the damp sea air brushed gently over its historic rooftops like a voice from the past. Ellie stood by her classroom window, watching the light drizzle mist across the glass, her heart like a symphony still searching for its first notes. Ms. Lila approached, holding a thick beige envelope. "Ellie, I found this on your desk yesterday. Do you want to explain?" Her voice was gentle, but the worry behind it clung to each word. Ellie looked at the envelope. Inside were the copied notes she'd been keeping. The photo of the mysterious man, her recordings of Miranda's strange behavior, a sketch of the hourglass tattoo. All of it lay there, silent, waiting to be heard. She took a deep breath and asked quietly, "Ms. Lila, if a grown-up lies, but no one believes the child who notices, what should the child do?" Ms. Lila froze. A soft breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of rain and a hint of magnolia from the corner of the schoolyard. She sat beside Ellie, gently placing her hand over the girl's clenched fingers. "Ellie, I don't know what you're up against, but the truth has a strength of its own. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be told at the right time. And if you're scared to say it out loud, then let me be the first to listen." For the first time in weeks, Ellie let the tears spill over without hiding them. She spoke slowly, steadily, about what she had seen, heard and feared. About how Miranda changed when her father wasn't home. About the stranger in the garden. About the photo and the strange touch on her hair. About the whispered threat in the dark. Curious children don't end well. And finally, her deepest fear, that the father she loved was walking step by step toward a cliff's edge without realizing it. Ms. Lila didn't press her with questions. She simply nodded, softly, consistently. And her eyes, glowing with quiet concern, told Ellie she'd chosen the right person to trust. You won't be alone in this, but we need another adult who will believe it too. Is there someone in your family who might listen? Ellie thought of Aunt June. The woman had always possessed sharp instincts, once tilting her head and eyeing Miranda with suspicion, once whispering to Ellie in the kitchen. Sometimes a beautiful dress hides a very deep tear underneath. Ellie nodded. Aunt June, but I don't want Daddy to know. Not yet. That afternoon, Ellie didn't ride home with Miranda. She texted that she had an unexpected tutoring session, then quietly left with Ms. Lila for Aunt June's house. The little street lay still beneath rows of old magnolia trees, branches interwoven into a green archway, like arms guarding untold secrets. Aunt June opened the door in a flour-dusted apron, surprised at first, then pulled Ellie into a tight embrace when she heard the first words. Auntie, I need to talk, but no one else can know. In a kitchen scented with butter and cinnamon waffles, the three of them sat in a circle. An unspoken ceremony of courage. Ellie placed the envelope of evidence on the table, her voice no longer trembling like it had that morning, but clear. The voice of someone who had chosen to shine a light into the darkness. Aunt June read through each page slowly, occasionally glancing at Miss Lila, her sharp eyes narrowing as the pieces began to suggest a danger not yet fully formed. This child isn't imagining things, she murmured. She's observing. She's remembering. She's connecting the dots. Ms. Lila nodded. And she needs adults to stand with her before it's too late. A plan took shape right there at the kitchen table, quiet but resolute. Aunt June would investigate, reaching out to an old friend who used to be a private detective. Ms. Lila would document Ellie's account, carefully and legally, in her role as an educational authority. And Ellie, she would continue watching, silently, like the magnolia tree outside the porch. She would wait for the right moment. For when her father returned to tell him everything, not through tears, but with evidence. By the time Ellie left her aunt's house, night had fallen. The scent of wet earth blended with magnolia and sea breeze made her feel a little lighter. In her hands was a new notebook, a gift from Aunt June. Write everything you see, every day, in detail. Don't skip anything. The truth always finds a way out if you're patient enough. Ellie nodded, holding the notebook like a treasure. On the first page, she wrote, April 14th. I've begun to tell it all. This time, no one will say I'm just a child, imagining things. The wind from Magnolia Street brushed against her collar like a gentle encouragement. She kept walking, small, silent, but as steadfast as the last light clinging to the end of a closing day. Nights in Charleston were usually as peaceful as a wordless hymn. But that night, inside the red brick house of the Carter family, Ellie's heart could not rest. The pages of the new journal seemed to carry a strange warmth, making her feel less alone in the silent battle she was waging. Yet, in that fragile space, a quiet unease crept through her. Not through her eyes, but through the intuition her mother once described. There are things you won't see, Ellie, but your heart will always recognize when something is wrong. That sense took form on the Sunday afternoon after her meeting with Aunt June. Miranda picked Ellie up later than usual, claiming she had a meeting with the wedding event team. But as the car rolled down the cobbled street toward their house, Ellie glanced into the rearview mirror and caught the faint reflection of a black car. No visible plates, silently trailing them at a safe distance. No honk, no attempt to pass, just presence. Quiet, looming like a nameless ghost. "Miranda," Ellie said, keeping her tone casual. "Did you notice the car behind us has been going the same way since we turned off Magnolia Road?" Miranda didn't look back. Her lips just pressed slightly tighter. "Oh, probably just coincidence, Ellie. Small city. Everyone knows where we live." But the way she pressed the gas harder than usual told Ellie everything. Miranda didn't believe it was a coincidence at all. That night, Ellie cracked her bedroom door slightly, listening for sounds from downstairs. And then, barely audible, she heard a man's laugh, rough and muffled by the clink of glasses. Miranda's voice followed, soft as wind, yet soaked in calculation. "Just 3 more weeks, and you'll get what you want. And so will I." Ellie held her breath. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't the overactive mind of a lonely child. The man was real. And Miranda's voice had lost all its sweet notes it used around her father. What remained was something Ellie had only ever heard in films about betrayal, deception, and death dressed in wedding white. The next day, when Ms. Lila received a handwritten note from Ellie, she didn't say anything. She just nodded and quietly arranged for Ellie to leave school early, under the pretense of emotional evaluation after a family event. Aunt June picked her up at the gate. In the car, Ellie told her everything. The strange voice, the car, the feeling of being watched, and her greatest fear. "I think they know. They know I'm investigating." Aunt June didn't answer right away. She took Ellie to a small coffee shop hidden off Trad Street. The air smelled of espresso, old paper, and pinewood. There, Aunt June made a short call, speaking in coded phrases like, "We need to check the foundation on the Magnolia project," and "might need an independent surveyor." When she hung up, she turned to Ellie. "You're going to meet a friend of mine. His name is Monroe, a former detective, now freelance. Don't let his scruffy look fool you. He's the one who exposed a fake psychologist who swindled nearly $500,000 from elite families in Georgia." They met Monroe the next morning. He was in his 40s, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled coat. But his eyes were sharp as blades and clear as glass. After just a few details from Ellie, he opened his laptop, asked for dates and times, and began cross-referencing Miranda's statements with the wedding registry, social media accounts, and several shadow databases. "This kid's sharper than half the cops I've worked with," Monroe muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. "And I'm not kidding. That event planner guy might be John T. Breaker, once suspected of conning a woman in Nashville into marriage, then vanishing with $200,000 in life insurance." Ellie's heart beat like a festival drum. Her suspicions were being confirmed piece by piece, assembling into a dark portrait. It wasn't just Miranda. Her beloved father was being drawn into a game of life and death, every move calculated, every moment manipulated by a machine dressed in a wedding gown. At the end of the meeting, Monroe handed Ellie a small USB drive. "Inside, you'll find everything I've uncovered about Miranda." Her real name may be Cassandra Vale. Keep it safe. If anything happens, give it to the police. Or to an adult you trust." He leaned down, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "And Ellie, you don't have to fight this alone. You may be small, but you're doing something most grown-ups wouldn't have the courage to." That night, Ellie returned home and hid the USB inside the hem of her mother's old teddy bear. She continued her journal, writing every night, not just to record what she saw, but to build a plan for survival, guided by a child's intuition that love is not always safe. And sometimes, to save the one you love from death, you must first walk through hell before the light can return. That morning, Charleston wrapped itself in a mist as thin as silk, draped across the old treetops along the Ashley River, making the city look as if it was holding onto a secret not yet ready to be revealed. In the private suite at the Belmont Hotel, where Miranda had rented the entire top floor to prepare for the wedding, the rustle of silk dresses whispered like lullabies spun from lies. The wedding flowers had arrived, pristine white, shaped into an arch at the steps of St. Andrew's Church, where Grayson Carter, Ellie's beloved father, was moments away from signing the first page of a new chapter. Unaware, it was written in poisoned ink. Ellie stood in the flower girl's dressing room, her pale silver gown wrapping around her small frame like the border of an old portrait. Each turn of her body sent the fabric swaying like soft waves. But inside her, the sky had already split in two. Everything about this wedding day felt too perfect. So perfect it became terrifying, like a mask worn too well. The organ rehearsals floated from the main hall, cheerful chatter echoed down the corridor, and the scent of white orchid candles mixed with hairspray made Ellie feel as if she were trapped in a performance where the final scene would end in a fall no one expected. Then, Miss Lila, the one adult not bound by blood, but who understood Ellie more than most relatives ever could, leaned down, fastening a small flower into her hair, and whispered, "You still have a chance to speak to your father. You just need to choose the right moment. Don't let silence bury the truth." Ellie nodded. Her heart was no longer a place for hesitation. She knew that without her, today's wedding could become a one-way ticket into permanent darkness for her father. As the wedding procession began lining up outside the sanctuary, Ellie scanned the room quietly. Aunt June sat in the back pew next to a man in a plain gray suit who drew no attention, Monroe. An earpiece looped around his ear, and in his hand was a thick envelope, Ellie guessed, that contained the final proof. Their eyes met hers, just long enough to confirm the time had come. St. Andrew's Church shimmered under stained glass light, vibrant ribbons of color pouring onto the pews like gentle miracles. Grayson stood at the altar, his tailored tuxedo outlining a tall, composed figure. His expression was peaceful, heartbreakingly so. Beside him, an aging pastor held a gold-edged book, and in front of them stretched the aisle layered with flower petals as Miranda made her way down it. Miranda, in an ivory hand-stitched wedding gown, looked like a flawless sculpture brought to life. Every eye followed her, awed, enchanted, unaware that this woman was the playwright of a tragedy masked as love. The pastor's voice rang out, steady as the ticking of fate. And then he paused at the age-old words. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence fell, thick as dust settled on statues in an abandoned chapel. No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Then Ellie stepped forward. Her small hand clutched the gray teddy bear her mother once gave her, and her voice, soft but cutting like a shattered bell, rose through the stillness. "Daddy, you can't marry her." The entire church froze. Grayson turned, stunned. Miranda stood paralyzed. All eyes landed on Ellie, as if she were a sudden gust of wind blowing through a sealed cathedral door. But Ellie didn't falter. Her voice grew steadier, clearer. "Her real name isn't Miranda Vale. She's been married to 3 other men, all of whom died after she inherited their life insurance. The man she's secretly meeting isn't a wedding planner. He's her accomplice." Miranda let out a soft, fractured laugh. "She's just overwhelmed. I think we should stop." "No." Ellie raised the gray teddy bear high. "Inside, this is a copy of all the evidence. Detective Monroe and Aunt June have the originals. The police are outside the church gates." And as if on cue, the cathedral doors burst open. Detective Monroe, now in full uniform, stepped in with 2 officers flanking him, nodding firmly at the pastor. Silence turned to chaos. Some guests stood abruptly. Miranda froze midway up the altar steps, and for a brief second, her mask fell away. No more smiles, no more sweet glances. Only a face twisted with rage and eyes like a cornered animal. Grayson turned to Ellie, his heart breaking into 2 pieces. One for the betrayal that crushed him, the other for the overwhelming gratitude he felt. He knelt down, opened the teddy bear, and found the folder his daughter had protected with her very soul. And he understood. Miranda was handcuffed under the stunned gazes of the guests. But as she turned back to Ellie, she uttered only one sentence. "You'll regret this." Ellie didn't answer. She simply reached for her father's hand, and for the first time in many months, he pulled her into his arms and whispered, like a prayer, "I'm sorry I didn't see. But I see you now, and I believe you." On the church steps, a wedding flower tumbled to the ground, shattered by the wind. But in the soft, gold light of sunset, something new began to bloom. Not from false romance, but from a love that was real. The love between a father and his daughter. And within the sacred space of that sanctuary, an echo lingered. A promise that light, once sparked by a pure heart, can never be swallowed by darkness. That afternoon, Charleston fell into a hush, as though the entire city was wrapped in a prayer yet to be finished. St. Andrew's Church, which only hours before had glowed with fresh flowers and celebration, now bore a quiet solemnity, as if its ancient walls had just witnessed a wedding pulled back from the brink of disaster, saved by the small hands of a child who trusted her intuition more than the polished faces of adults. Outside, the guests gradually dispersed, their murmurs weaving through the air with confusion, disbelief, shame, and a thread of quiet relief. But inside, in the small family room behind the sanctuary, Ellie sat curled in a wooden chair by the window, still clutching the silver teddy bear, the worn companion that had become the most important witness of the day. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because inside her was a silence too deep for tears. The silence that comes when a child grows up too suddenly after having to look directly into the darkness of grown-ups. Grayson stood nearby, leaning against the wall, his eyes staring out the fogged glass. The tuxedo was gone. Only a wrinkled dress shirt and a cuff button undone. He was no longer the polished millionaire everyone admired, but simply a father who had lost faith in his own judgment and found something far more precious than any ceremony: belief in his daughter. Aunt June's voice drifted in from the half-open door. The police have taken Miranda, or rather Vivian Hart, into custody. Tyler was also arrested on the highway near Savannah while trying to cross the state line. Grayson nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Ellie. "Thank you, June," he said quietly, then stepped toward his daughter. He sat beside her, leaned gently to her level. No rush, no excuses. Just silence, stretching long before his voice came. "I was blind, Ellie. I didn't listen to you when you needed me most." Ellie didn't turn. She only held the teddy bear tighter. But then, in a whisper so soft it could have been the wind, she said, "I wasn't afraid because she hated me. I was afraid you'd never believe me again." Grayson shivered slightly. That fear, the fear of being denied by the one you love most, hurts deeper than any betrayal. He reached out and gently touched his daughter's shoulder, his gaze softening like twilight brushing across an old stone wall. "I believe you. Now, and I always will. Even if it came late." For the first time that entire day, Ellie turned and wrapped her small arms around her father. Her tears soaked into his shirt like a late rain. There was no sobbing, no unraveling. Just two wounded hearts quietly finding their way back to each other through an apology that didn't need many words. That night, the Carter family's home on the outskirts of Charleston became a true place of refuge. The police had secured the perimeter, but what warmed the house was something else entirely. The sound of familiar footsteps. Ms. Lila arrived with fresh-baked pastries and a few fairy tale books. Detective Monroe came by with a thick folder of case files from Miranda's past. A way of closing the chapter with the truth. Aunt June prepared a simple dinner, but somehow the mac and cheese brought everyone back to childhood, to a time when nightmares could be chased away by a hug and the soft glow of a nightlight. After dinner, Grayson called Ellie out to the porch. The silver moonlight spread across the lawn in gentle streaks, like wordless music. They sat side by side in silence for several minutes, until Grayson handed her a small box wrapped in navy velvet. "I meant to give this to you on the wedding day, but today is the right day." Ellie opened it. Inside was a delicate silver compass pendant, engraved at the center with, "Always follow your truth, Dad." She looked up at him, her eyes shining not just from the gift, but from something deeper. "You did the right thing, Ellie," he said, placing his hand over his heart. "You didn't just save me from a terrible marriage. You saved me from a loneliness I never dared to admit." Ellie nodded softly, then leaned her head against his shoulder. Beneath the quiet light of night, no more words were needed. Everything they had to hear, they had heard. And amidst the wreckage of a beautiful dream that had turned dark, father and daughter rediscovered something far more extraordinary. Trust, presence, and love. No ceremony, no flowers, just an embrace and one unshakable truth. We're still a family. 3 weeks after the ruined wedding, once the wilted flowers were cleared from the church gates and the whispers faded like dusk over Shem Creek, the old Carter estate wore a new kind of air. No longer a cold castle stuffed with rituals and polished illusions. It was becoming a home that remembered how to breathe again. With windows flung open to the morning sun, children's laughter echoing through the living room, and old photographs of Ellie's late mother restored to the most honored places on the wall, no longer replaced by soulless glass frames. In the gentle slowness of spring, something quiet had begun to bloom again between father and daughter. A resurrection, not loud but steady and real. That evening, Grayson and Ellie sat together on the old porch rocker, sharing pizza and soda as if celebrating something they both knew, but never named. At their feet, Buster, Buster, the puppy Aunt June brought for Ellie, lay stretched out, breathing softly. Grayson glanced over at his daughter, her head tilted as she scribbled something into a small notebook. He asked quietly, "Journaling again?" Ellie smiled without looking up. "I'm writing an essay. What I learned from a grown-up who lied well." Ms. Lila signed it. Grayson paused, then laughed. Not the strained laugh of weeks past, but warm and alive, like a fireplace finally burning bright. "Ms. Lila's a smart woman," he said, "and so are you. I'm still learning how to be honest with you." Ellie looked at her father with clear eyes, already older than her age. "Not all grown-ups are wrong, Dad. Sometimes they're just too busy chasing made-up happiness to see the real kind." Sitting quietly right beside them, Grayson stared at her for a long time, then nodded. A quiet confession. Each passing night, he read a new chapter about himself. A man who thought he was strong, but had once been so lost he couldn't see. A man who believed wounds could be covered by replacements, instead of healed by something real. But now, he understood. Nothing, no one, could ever replace the presence of a true soul. Like Ellie, who had always been there, small, but astonishingly brave. The following week, a letter arrived from the Charleston Police Department. Vivian Hart, also known as Miranda Vale, had been sentenced to 22 years in prison. Tyler Cooper received 12 years after turning state's evidence. The news marked a firm end to the long nightmare. But for Grayson and Ellie, this wasn't a moment to celebrate. It was a quiet time to fold away pain into the deepest drawers of the heart and make space for something better to grow. One Sunday afternoon, Grayson took Ellie to a small plot of land beside the city library. He handed her a wooden plaque carved with the words, "The Ellie Foundation, protecting the small from big lies." Ellie froze, stunned. Grayson smiled, gently brushing her hair back. "You were the one who saw the truth when all the grown-ups were blind. You deserve to use what you've lived through to make sure others don't fall into the same darkness. I'll build this place as a support center for victims of fraud. And you, if you want, will be our very first junior advisor." Ellie held the wooden sign in her hands as if she were carrying an enormous responsibility. And yet, her eyes shimmered with a happiness that words couldn't quite name. "I accept," she said. "But the center has to serve pizza every Friday and have a really big reading room." Grayson burst out laughing. "Deal, partner." That day, as they hammered the sign into the soft soil of that empty plot, no one noticed that a few passers-by had stopped, smiling, nodding in quiet approval. Something small but very real had taken root. From a lie meant to destroy, a truth had planted a new seed, one of protection, trust, and hope. Ellie turned to her father, eyes glowing in the golden afternoon light. "Dad," she whispered, "I think Mom is smiling." Grayson gently squeezed her shoulder, his eyes drifting up to the open sky. "I think so too, and I believe you're the most beautiful thing your mother ever left behind." Beneath the gentle breeze and soft light falling from the distant Charleston lighthouse, father and daughter stood together on ground where new beginnings were taking shape. A place where trust was reborn, not through punishment, but through forgiveness and the courage of a small heart that chose to stand for what was right. And that, above all, was life's truest miracle. A warm summer wind blew across the Carter estate's wide porch, carrying with it the salt of the ocean and the scent of late-blooming jasmine. Nearly a year had passed since the day Ellie stopped the fateful wedding since she last saw the cold, calculated face of the woman who almost became her stepmother, but whom her young heart had instinctively recognized as someone unkind. Now, it was as if the painting of their lives had been redrawn. Though traces of old outlines remained, faint and never fully erased, especially on silent nights when Ellie lay awake, eyes wide in the dark, waiting for something she couldn't name. That night, rain pattered gently on the roof tiles, like a background score to some vague unease. Ellie jolted awake to a faint sound. Not thunder, not rain, but the soft click of a window latch giving way to the breeze. She stepped out of bed, bare feet touching the cool wooden floor, and moved silently toward the window. Outside, there was only nightfall and trembling trees. But what made her stop was the shadow, a figure standing motionless near the back iron gate, separate from the familiar shapes of the garden. The next morning, as she and Grayson shared pancakes in a sunlit kitchen, Ellie recounted what she'd seen. Grayson, ever calm, set down his fork and tilted his head. "You're sure you saw someone?" Ellie nodded, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "It wasn't just the trees. It wasn't my imagination. They stood there, and then they vanished." Grayson took a slow breath, the look in his eyes sharp, like the one he used to wear in the courtroom when reading the case files of his opponents. "I'll check the security footage," he said quietly, "and I'll call Detective Monroe." That afternoon, Monroe arrived with his usual steady presence. He didn't speak much, just moved methodically through the security system, traced the perimeter, and finally paused at one small but undeniable clue. A long black hair, caught on the fence's barbed edge. Too fine to belong to Ellie, and definitely not Grayson's. He carefully sealed it in an evidence pouch, his eyes narrowing slightly as he compared it against old case notes. No one needed to say it, but all three of them understood. Someone, just possibly, had come back. That night, Ellie didn't sleep in her room. She curled up under a thick blanket on the living room couch, close to the soft lights and closer to her father. Grayson stayed up the entire night. Not out of fear, but because he now understood that his daughter's unease had never truly left. For all the months they had stood together, fought back, and rebuilt, the shadows still found ways to slip through the cracks of even the most carefully restored trust, especially for a child who had been forced to grow up in suspicion. The next morning, as dawn lit the porch in gold, Monroe returned with new findings. The hair matched an old DNA sample from Vanessa Hill, the real name of the woman once known as Miranda Vale. No one knew why she'd come back. Was it revenge? A warning? Or simply a fleeting glance toward the past from someone who had lost all sense of purpose? "We'll increase security over the next few weeks," Monroe said, his voice steady, his eyes serious, like someone predicting a storm that hadn't yet arrived. "But the most important thing is, you both need to keep living. Don't let her win by planting fear." Grayson took Ellie's hand as the detective walked away, his grip warm, steady. "I won't let anything happen to you. We survived once, and if it ever happens again, we'll survive it together." That night, instead of curling up in fear, Ellie threw open the window to her room, letting the sea breeze sweep away the mustiness of the past. She placed her teddy bear beside her pillow, the same one that once held the evidence that exposed Miranda, now simply a loyal friend, a keeper of secrets. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'm not afraid anymore. You can try to scare me, but you can't take back the trust my father found in me." And then she closed her eyes her heartbeat calm, no longer running from fear, but bravely waiting for it, the way a guardian of the light waits for dawn to break through the dark. Somewhere in Charleston, other eyes were watching too, not with malice this time, but with quiet protection. Old friends, those who had witnessed the story of this father and daughter, remained ready should the truth ever again be threatened. Because there are people who, once they've stood for the light, will never let it be extinguished again. On Sunday morning, Charleston glowed under a golden sun, like the city itself had been brushed with honey. The cobblestone streets glistened after the night's rain. Oak trees draped in moss swayed gently in the breeze, and the Carter estate seemed to awaken from a long dream, a dream laced with sweetness and threat, life and the edge of the abyss. But today, there was only one thing left: peace. In the backyard garden, once the scene of silent footsteps and shadowy intent. Laughter now echoed brightly. Ellie wore a simple white dress with hand-stitched flowers, her soft curls tied back with a pale blue ribbon, chasing the little dog Grayson had brought home 2 weeks earlier. A promise that life would begin again, not haunted by what had been, but running freely toward what could be. Grayson sat under the shade of a tree, one hand holding a cup of tea, the other a book he hadn't touched in months. In the shimmering light, he was no longer the millionaire almost caught in a scheme, but a father who had passed through confusion and come to see the one thing that mattered most: his daughter, the one who saved him with love, pure enough to shine through the darkest deception. That afternoon, Detective Monroe and Ms. Lila joined them for dinner on the porch. They sat beneath hanging flower baskets as the breeze carried the scent of grilled chicken across the veranda. Those who had once been witnesses, once the quiet support behind the scenes, had now become family, not by blood, but by a bond woven through truth and trust. During the meal, Monroe spoke softly. "It's official. The FBI confirmed. Vanessa Hill, or whatever name she's used, was arrested at the Mexican border during a random checkpoint. She confessed to everything. The case is closed." Grayson gently squeezed Ellie's hand. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, not out of fear, but with the calm of someone who now knew that true closure isn't found in arrest warrants, but in a heart that no longer trembles. That night, in the warmth of her bedroom, Ellie opened the drawer of her desk and pulled out a wooden box her mother had left behind. Inside was a silver necklace with a glimmering sapphire pendant, a keepsake from a gentle woman Ellie remembered only through dreams. She fastened it around her neck, then stepped to the window and looked out at the garden where her father stood watering the flowers. His face tilted up, catching her gaze. They smiled at each other, the kind of smile shared by people who have walked through storms together and no longer need words to say that they've made it through. The next day, a special event was held at the Charleston Community Center. A new plaque was unveiled with quiet reverence. The Sophie Bell Foundation, protecting children and families from fraud and emotional abuse. The foundation bore the name of Ellie's mother, a symbol of unconditional love. But its spark came from Ellie herself, the little girl who proved that sometimes the smallest heart can be the compass that guides lost adults back to what truly matters. During the ceremony, Ellie was invited to speak. She stood on a small stage, microphone trembling in her hands, wide eyes glowing bright. And when she spoke, it wasn't the voice of a child reciting a memorized speech. It was her truth. I used to think I was just a little kid, someone no one believed. But then I learned If you speak with all your courage and love, you can reach someone's heart. And sometimes, one sentence spoken at the right time can save an entire family. The room erupted in applause. But Grayson, standing at the back, simply looked at his daughter with soft eyes, quietly wiping away a tear he no longer cared to hide. That night, Ellie wrote in her diary with purple ink, "There was a time she almost made me believe love wasn't real. But then I realized the truest kind of love is when Dad held me in the dark and said, 'I believe you.' Love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay." Before bed, she hung the silver compass her father gave her by the window. Not to find a way out anymore, but to remind herself that once she'd been lost and then found the light. And so, the story closes. Not with a perfect ending, but with a journey that chose light over darkness, trust over doubt, and love over fear. To you, the audience who has stayed until the very end. There are moments in life when everything feels uncertain, when the truth seems out of reach, and trust feels fragile. But remember, all it takes is one spark, one honest heart, to light the way not only for yourself, but for the ones you love. And like Ellie did, you too can save someone, simply by choosing to believe in what's right, in unconditional love, in a tomorrow worth hoping for. And so, after the chaos, the tears, and the danger, the house that once stood on the brink of tragedy became a home again, warm with love, lit by awareness, and held together by renewed trust. An 8-year-old girl, small but full of courage, had not only saved her father from a perfect trap, but reminded us all. Sometimes the quietest voice is the one that must be heard the most. Do you remember? How many times in your life have you felt something was wrong, but stayed silent, afraid of being seen as too suspicious, too childish, or too unbelievable? Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't come from clear evidence, but from a quiet feeling, like the one Sophie followed, bravely speaking up, even when no one else would listen. Perhaps the most important question after this story isn't what happened, but rather, if it were you, would you have the courage to speak the truth, even if you were the only one who saw it? Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. If this story touched something in your heart, share it so that more people are reminded. Sometimes the truth is lit, not by a spotlight, but by a single, unwavering flame. And when that flame burns, it can guide the world. Where are you listening from? And has there ever been a Sophie in your life? Someone whose voice wasn't heard in time? Tell us in the comments. Wishing you peace. And remember, always trust your intuition, because someday it might be the very thing that saves you or someone you love.